Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the Dynasty Slant, powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings. I'm your usual host, Michael Moore, along with my usual co-host, Russell Clay. Say hello, Russ.
Aloha.
Russ, this is the what I call season premiere of the Dynasty Slant for the 2016 season. For Dynasty guys such as you and myself, it's been a long time since we've been able to dive as deep as we want to into Dynasty content. And let's face it, if you're listening to a Dynasty football podcast, you are the diehard, really committed Dynasty fantasy football players. So we applaud you. But point is, we're going to be able to dive into a lot of different content, a lot of different players. It's going to be good stuff, I think. So, Russ, anything to add to that or to pep up our faithful listeners out there?
No, this is going to be fun. As he said, if you're watching this now, interested in Dynasty, it's only February 1st. The Super Bowl hasn't even come yet.
I applaud you. I really do.
So that means you didn't even detox yourself. You're just going straight through into the next year. So
and that's okay. That's why you play Dynasty, Russ.
That's what we love to do here, and we're glad you're going on the ride with us.
You all need that itch to scratch, and we are here to scratch it for you. So, or something a little less graphic. But, so I think for this episode, Russ, we're going to do our usual news and notes section that we did on the Fantasy Slant, because there's still a lot of stuff that happens during the week, I think, that's relevant to Dynasty players. And boy, was there a big one this week that we'll get into a little bit. And then you and I are going to talk a little bit of strategy, a little bit of, I guess, style when it comes to playing Dynasty leagues regarding the offseason and when you dive into that stuff and what you dive into and hopefully some tips for everyone out there to abide by. And then you and I, Russ, are going to get into some buy lows heading into the offseason because let's face it, that's what you're all really here for. So without further ado, let's just jump right in. I think we have to go off this assumption, Russ, that Calvin Johnson, Lions all-around awesome receiver, is going to retire. He hasn't made it official yet, but all the insiders and all the news networks are reporting it as such. So I don't know, Russ, like, what do you say to console those Calvin Johnson dynasty owners such as myself?
And myself. Instead of aloha today, I should have said aloha.
Yeah.
Because that's how I'm feeling today. I had him, I wouldn't say in a significant amount of my dynasties because he's been pretty hard to acquire until I'd say I'd say around week 4 or week 5 of this year in Dynasty. That was pretty much the first time that he was really easy-ish to acquire. But I don't really have any good advice right now. This is a bad beat you're taking. You're losing some major value off your dynasty team that you were kind of locked in. You locked him in for the next 2 to 3 years at least. He's a generational talent. He is an absolute freak of nature, and he was a wide receiver one most of his career, and now he's ripped. He's ripped away from your dynasty teams. Who knows if he's going to come back? Definitely not a droppable option. But yeah, this is basically as bad as Josh Gordon getting suspended for the year.
Russ, let's just be clear, because we're talking like he died. He did not die. He's just being removed from our dynasty teams potentially. But I mean, you're right, though. It's a big blow. I still recall my very first Dynasty startup draft, which was my very first Dynasty league, which was, no more than 4 or 5 years ago. Calvin Johnson was on draft boards for Dynasty startup leagues. He just was, because he played a premium position, or what was then a premium position, and he was the best by far, and he was still young. I mean, he was mid-20s 5 years ago. So, yeah, it's a really hard pill to swallow, especially, fun fact, his 86 yards a game, the most yards a game for a receiver with a minimum of 100 games played. Literally one of the more efficient receivers of all time. So obviously it's a big blow to your dynasty team if you had him slotted in as receiver. Let's talk, Russ, a little bit about the guys affected by this on the Lions, namely Matt Stafford, who, I think you could have argued if Calvin Johnson stuck around, we could have made a, interesting buy low option for dynasty leagues heading into this offseason. What does this do to his value now? Does this completely torpedo it?
Well, when you look at his production last year when Calvin was out and sort of Golden Tate ran wild, I'm probably not as concerned as most people, but it's definitely not a good thing, and clearly the ceiling is even more capped than it was before. I think Stafford's pretty much an average NFL quarterback, so he's not going to be losing his starting job, and even if he does, he'll get another job somewhere else. But this definitely caps his once potentially elite ceiling.
Yeah, and I'd agree with you. I think if Calvin Johnson stuck around, there was a chance Stafford could sneak in as kind of a quarterback one, the low end quarterback one rating. But this, I think to borrow a phrase from fantasy Twitter, he's just a guy. So
right.
So that kind of makes Golden Tate an interesting option now. I mean, Look, I think you and I were both fans of Golden Tate heading into this offseason. I mean, he was a real under-the-radar guy, but very productive in his time in Detroit. But this squarely puts him out front to be the top receiving option there. Is this good or bad for Tate's fantasy production, Russ, and his dynasty production?
It is good. As I mentioned, that stretch when Calvin was out, he was a low-end wide receiver one. So, and that was in 2014. But the interesting thing about this is there's so many good wide receivers right now, and there's going to be a really deep rookie class coming in. So I don't think this is going to shift his dynasty value much at all. I think he's in line for more targets, pretty much guaranteed now. But I don't think you're going to have to pay more to get him, even if the hype train does build on him. There's just so many strong receivers in front of him. It doesn't really matter.
So where are you placing Tate right now as far as value? Is he a wide receiver 2 for you? Is he a wide receiver 3/flex? Where are you comfortable putting him in your starting lineup?
Yeah, and that's the problem. This is a really rough estimate right now because we don't know about these rookies that are incoming. But currently, right now with the landscape, I'd say he is 20 to 25-ish, somewhere around there.
So low-end wide receiver 2, let's say.
Right, but only because this is the golden age of wide receivers, and there's like 16 wide receiver ones in front of him,
which is pretty impressive. But I think you make a good point, though, about Tate. Look, if this Calvin Johnson news stands, which, look, we're a long way off, obviously, from the start of the season, I think I'm going to be targeting Tate in my dynasty league, especially as a buy low. But now, given, I think some people could think the same thing you and I are thinking, which is, hey, he's now the top receiver in Detroit, so that's going to enhance his value. But even then, I think people are going to be willing to part with him for less than what he might actually produce this year. Is that right?
Right. He's middle-aged. He's had solid production, but nothing fantastic. There's always the newer toys that are more exciting. So he's just kind of like that reliable option. And I don't see how he wouldn't get 1,000 yards next year, sort of with that situation as is.
Yeah. And I don't want to go out and predict Detroit's going to be bad next year this early, but they might be bad, which means they're going to be behind, which means they're going to be throwing it a lot. So, but I think you and I are in agreement on that. So, Calvin Johnson, we hardly knew ye. And look, who knows? He might come back. He might surprise us all. And then we'll have a whole other segment, Russ, later in the season about what this does for everybody.
Of me just screaming, thank you.
Yeah, I know. I should have worn my Calvin Johnson tonight. I don't know what I was thinking. All right, so let's go to the other bit of news this week, Russ. Travis Kelce re-signs in Kansas City, an extension that he earned. Don't get me wrong, for 5 years. What does this news do for you, Russ, as far as Kelce's dynasty value? I mean, I don't think anyone would doubt he was a tight end one, but you and I think also agree there's just a gluttony of parity when it comes to tight end ones, not named Rob Gronkowski. So what does this news do for you as far as Kelce's outlook in dynasty leagues?
Well, I can't say it's a broken situation in Kansas City. He almost had 900 receiving yards this year. I mean, he was basically their number one weapon. It was between him and Macklin, but they both got really good usage. So Jordan Reed and Tyler Eifert and Zach Ertz are emerging, and I think they're all in relatively the same tier. So I don't see him clearly above any of those players, but he's a solid, a steady tight end one, which is a few years ago not something we would have expected. So I like him. I like that value, and I think he's a pretty solid dynasty asset right now.
Well, I'm going to give my first hot take of the offseason, Russ. I hate this for Travis Kelce. I agree with everything you said. He's a clear tight end one. I would be thrilled to have him on my dynasty team. But I think as long as he's in Kansas City, as long as Andy Reid's his coach, as long as Alex Smith is his quarterback, he's never going to get numbers above this. I can't see it. And look, his last two seasons have been nearly identical. So 2014, 67 catches, 862 yards, 5 touchdowns. 2015, 72 catches, 875 yards, 5 touchdowns. Okay, there's a theme here. Okay, he gets 70 catches for close to 900 yards and 5 touchdowns, which is awesome. It's tight end one numbers. Do not get me wrong. But is he ever going to reach Gronk heights in Kansas City? No.
And that 2-year sample size, sort of snaps, targets, and receptions are an indicator of how sort of the team feels about him in the scheme of that offense. So I do agree. He's not going to become what he clearly could be in that offense.
And that's why, again, I hate it for Travis Kelce dynasty owners, because I think it just caps him. I really think his value or his ability is so much more than they're displaying in Kansas City. Even with that awesome production and even with those tight end one numbers, I think you could argue he's the third best tight end in dynasty right now. But we'll never know if he could challenge for one as long as he's in Kansas City. If he were hypothetically to become a free agent and go somewhere where he was the featured receiving option, he could do some real damage there. But it's not going to happen, at least not anytime soon.
We took two very different routes to this conclusion, and now I'm sad.
I know.
Looking at it this way, it's like, he really, I mean, and Alex Smith is going to be there.
Right. That's the sad part. Alex Smith is going to be there. Well, that's what I'm here for, Russ, to throw cold water on all your hopes and dreams. So, like I said, believe me, this ensures he will be a tight end one. I have no doubt about that. And I have no doubt he'll put up similar numbers for a few years. But again, it's just very unfortunate because I think he could have been a lot more. I really do. And
the biggest threat to Travis Kelce right now is that reality TV show he's about to. I mean, you're not kidding. I mean, look, if you need an example, just look at any athlete that went on Keeping Up with the Kardashians, right? Yeah. Have you seen one that ended up getting better after they went on that show? No. Reggie Bush, downhill. Chris Humphries, downhill. James Harden, even. I don't even is he doing anything this year? I don't think so. You're more of an NBA guy than I am. He's lazy though.
Well, there you go. And Lamar Odom, well, we don't even have to go there. So I'm with you, Russ. I think it's something to watch out for. Maybe if you can trade Travis Kelce pre-dating show, you might get some good return on that. But we digress. So all right, Russ. So that covered news and notes for this week. As I said before, we will look at any of the latest news that happen before each podcast. But for now, you and I are going to get into some strategy when it comes to Dynasty Leagues. Whether you're new to the format or you're a longtime Dynasty player, obviously You're doing it because you love fantasy football and you love it year round. You literally cannot stop. So with that said, Russ, why don't you talk a little bit about, why you got into Dynasty, when you started it, and then what's your approach this time of year so people can essentially rip us off and do what we do?
I think everyone gets into dynasty leagues because they just feel like they want more than just a seasonal league, and they want to test their evaluation skills almost. I feel like that's sort of the main decision maker behind getting into dynasty leagues. But for me, I just loved it. I love the idea. I love the format. So for me, I have 17 leagues. I've been pretty clear about that from the beginning.
Holy crap! I feel completely futile compared to that,
but pretty much in the off season, like when you're just starting to get into here, you're trying to figure out your targets and which guys maybe you want to sell this off season. You're getting a rough idea for what the landscape is in your perception. So you're looking at guys on your roster. You might want to sell them and maybe buy in other leagues. And then you're looking at other people's rosters and saying, okay, maybe I can get that guy for a good deal. And also maybe you're thinking about doing another startup, and you're just trying to form together where you view certain values.
Yeah.
That's my main goal right now.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that. I think for me, and again, I think I'm in a half dozen dynasty leagues, so nowhere near Russ, who's the master. But I think at this stage, for me, I look at my teams and I'm kind of gauging, okay, do I want this guy next year, right? Whether it's age or, situation, whatever, do I want this guy? So, for example, and you and I can get into this, with Calvin Johnson now, obviously it's a case of, holy crap, what do I do with him if you have him? And I think you and I agree it's way too early to ship him off necessarily. I mean, I think you have to hold until there's final confirmation. But, stuff like that's going to happen, whether it's retirements or extensions like with Kelce. I mean, you just got to be very on top of what's happening in the league the whole offseason. And again, that's why guys like you and I play Dynasty, is to keep that going even when they're not playing the games. I mean, for me, I really like the Dynasty mode or the franchise mode in Madden. And I've liked it for 10 years now. And this was sort of a real life chance to be a general manager and see, hey, if I really know my stuff or not. So it allows me that opportunity to all year play GM. And look, it keeps my attention, whether it's February or June or whatever, on who's getting cut, who's getting demoted, who's signing where, what have you, because all of that can affect your league and all of that can affect your team.
And to break it down, there's a few different parts of the off season that are really essential to dynasty leagues. One is sort of the combine, where everyone's building their draft boards and getting ready for their rookie drafts. Before that is free agency, which is where all you guys understand, but where all the players sort of shift and land in their spots for the next season or so. So those are the two most important times that you really need to be prepping for right now. If you have a general feel of that, that's definitely a good thing to have heading into it. And in general, I just think getting a look at the college rookies right around this time is a good time to start. No need to go 40 hours straight of watching prospects, but just get a general idea of who's out there and what type of year it is, what positions are generally strong or weak, and just get an idea for how you want to work that.
But look, if you want to watch tape for 40 hours, like, we're certainly not going to judge you. I mean, we probably would if we had the time. So,
right.
And you, all those are good points. I mean, again, and each league is a little different as far as when trading opens and stuff like that. But I don't think it's ever too early to determine, hey, I'm really weak at this position and I need to make it a priority. Or like you said, start looking at the college guys and seeing, hey, who's going to be, who's turning heads at either the combine or private workouts or whatever. Because, as much as those first rounds are important in rookie drafts, obviously, it's those later rounds too that can be just as important. Because, whether your strategy is to load up at a position or just take best player available, you can get a breakout guy in those later rounds. I mean, look at Thomas Rawls, for example. You probably couldn't nail down exactly what his ADP was heading into the season because it was all over the place. But look, he ended up winning people a couple of leagues. I promise you that. So it's a lot of stuff like that, and just like you said, get your ducks in a row for those rookie drafts.
And now instead of straight knowledge, it's more of a battle to who's quicker to the waiver wire, especially in dynasty leagues. It is a race to when some player signs somewhere. Who was the guy that the 49ers signed? He was from the CFL a few weeks ago.
Oh, you would ask me that. Hold on. I know who you're talking about.
Either way, it doesn't matter if it's some CFL player or Duron Carter last year with the Colts. Like, don't necessarily get caught up in the hype, but don't be afraid to rush to the waiver wire either. That's a really important aspect of dynasty leagues that goes really underrated. Playing that waiver wire correctly throughout the offseason is sort of where you make your move. I mean, you look at a lot of these players that made impacts this year, Charkandrick West, players like that are huge and can sort of put together weeks for you and get you to the playoffs. So you want to look for players.
It was Eric Rodgers, by the way, for the record.
Eric Rodgers.
There you go. Remember the name, Russ, because he will win some people a league, 12 months from now. So, but no, you bring up a good point. And Duron Carter, I think, is a perfect example of that. I mean, look, it's not like he eventually made an impact this year, but I think you and I both remember the what would you call it? The noise that signing made last year when he signed with Indianapolis, because there was a lot of uncertainty at that time. Whether it was, hey, is T.Y. Hilton coming back? They hadn't drafted Philip Dorsett at the time. So, I mean, there was an opening there at receiver. And at the time, it made sense. If you have a free roster spot, or maybe you've got a guy on your team that is going to retire for sure, unlike Calvin Johnson, who we don't know yet. It doesn't hurt, if it doesn't hurt, to take a chance on a guy like Duron Carter or like Eric Rodgers this year. I think you should, because look, those are what we like to call lottery tickets, right?
And they don't cost anything, which is the big key there, Right. And you might be able to eventually sell them, even if they aren't good and even if they haven't proved anything, you might be able to sell them for a little something. So that's kind of
right. And like lottery tickets, they're cheap, as you said. And look, they could pay off big and you win the jackpot. They could pay off a little bit and you only get 3 numbers out of 6 or what have you. So be on the lookout for things like that, because they could, if you get enough of those pieces together and you've got enough depth, it just makes you that much more flexible. So
right.
No, that's a very good point, Russ. So that is a perfect segue into what we're going to look at this edition, which is some initial dynasty buy lows. So these are guys that whose value may have dipped this year, or maybe has always been kind of lower, but makes sense to target because their price is so low, and that they could have a potentially bigger impact, whether it's next season or for a couple seasons after that. So Russ, why don't you and I can trade off. You and I both have some players we want to go through. I will let you do the honors, sir. Hit us with your first one.
Okay. And in terms of this, when I'm looking for buy low players, I'm looking to get them to potentially have their value rise and package them up for young studs. So that's the ultimate goal for me at all times in terms of getting buy low players. So to start off, I'm actually looking at a quarterback, an old quarterback. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at Tony Romo for the Dallas Cowboys. I feel that this year was a complete washout for that Cowboys offense. Other than Darren McFadden, who I'm very proud of.
I
But
would look. I'll bet the mortgage he doesn't do 1,000 yards again. But we'll get to that.
But I'm just loving this Dez Romo stack for next year. And I know stack is a DFS term, but I think it can be helpful in Dynasty too. I think they're both really undervalued right now. And we've seen in past years with sort of Andy Dalton last year, Phillip Rivers a few times, Eli Manning. You're looking at these late round old quarterbacks who haven't done anything and people just get bored with. And you can get them in the 12th, 13th, 14th round of a dynasty startup, which is basically you're throwing darts. And those are really solid values at that time. So if you can get a quarterback who can give you even 3 to 4 starts in a season at that point, that's a huge value for you. So I'm looking at Tony Romo in that range. I think he could come back and throw 30 to 35 touchdowns in 2016.
And I'm with you. I mean, whether your ultimate goal is to, flip a veteran for a package of younger guys, or even just ride that veteran for this season or the next one, it doesn't hurt. And I agree with you, everything you said about Romo. I mean, I think, and I know this is hard, I think you have to ignore this season when it comes to the Cowboys, whether it's Romo or Bryant, because it was just a perfect storm of bad things to happen, and you can't expect that to repeat itself. You really can't. They're still going to have an awesome offensive line next year. Hopefully Dez and Romo can stay healthy the entire season, but I think you have to operate off that assumption. I don't think you can just have the Debbie Downer point of view of, oh, he's old, he's going to get hurt again. You can't look at it that way, because if you do, then look, you're going to run out of players that you rely on, because every player in the NFL is going to be hurt at some point for an extended amount of time. It's just science and numbers. So I agree with that. And to sort of take off at that, actually, one of my guys was going to be Dez Bryant, quite honestly, that I think, I think people still view him as a wide receiver one, but look, I think he still has the ability to be the top receiver, especially now. With this Calvin Johnson news. And like you said, there's just a gluttony of receivers out there. But I still think Dez is completely capable of topping all of them. I mean, the previous 3 seasons before this ill-fated 2015, he had a minimum of 88 catches. He had a minimum of 1,233 yards, and he had a minimum of 12 touchdowns. Those were his minimums for the previous 3 years, and you're still going to have Romo coming back. Bryant is still going to be just 27 heading into next season. He'll turn 28 in November. So I don't know, man. I think there's going to be some Dez owners out there who are maybe snake bitten by him this past season and just really turned off by what happened. And I think you might be able to get him for a reasonable price. And if you are, I think I would be all over that.
And in terms of how I view players, I'm always looking at their startup value as what do they mean in a startup? So I'm looking at Dez Bryant this year, and I'm thinking he might fall even to the early second round of startups. I mean, most likely the late first, but that is an unbelievable value at that spot. So if he falls to that place, that is definitely someone who I'd want to target there. So yeah, I'm obviously with you on that.
All right, Russ, you're up next. I think you have another receiver you want to talk about.
Yes, Brashad Perriman, the Baltimore Ravens wide receiver. He was a rookie this year, and he was injured the entire season. He didn't even play a game. So to break down his personal situation, he was, in terms of his production at UCF, it was of a borderline elite deep threat option. That's kind of what he profiles as. He's big, and he can run. He ran below a 4.4 at his pro day. So this is a borderline elite athlete, and we're looking at him in an offense that has tons of targets up for grabs in terms of the passing game. I mean, Torrey Smith is gone. He was always a consistent option, but he doesn't have the upside that Perriman brings. So I think he's a good bet to get over 100 targets next year if he returns healthy. And I think you can get him in the 6th or 7th round of a startup right now. Probably the 5th, but I think after the rookies get in, he's going to be looked at in the 6th or 7th round of a startup. And he was a first-round pick last year. I just think he's got a lot of positive indicators, and he simply hasn't played yet, so he's getting discounted.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, and you alluded to the rookie receivers this year. I think the perfect time to target him is probably like right after the draft, the NFL draft, because putting all those new rookies into dynasty rankings is just going to push him down. I mean, because we didn't see him last year, there's going to be a lot of people that are still skeptical because he's going to essentially be another rookie. And, you're going to have a bunch of guys there. And like you said, there's already a bunch of wide receiver ones out there. I mean, his ranking is going to be really low, I think, heading into like training camp and preseason and stuff like that. And I'm with you. I think he's a perfect guy to target because his value is going to be cheap. I think a lot of people are going to either forget about him or he's already forgotten. And you can get him for a very reasonable price, and he could pay off. Like you said, it's not like he doesn't have a quarterback that can get him the ball. I mean, right. Joe Flacco, while maybe not elite as he's been wont to do, but he's still a good quarterback that I think can get receivers the ball. I mean, look at what Steve Smith did this year. So yeah, I'm with you there. I think Perriman is a perfect example of that. I'm going to stay with receiver, and another sort of in the Dez Bryant mold. I'm going Alshon Jeffery, which, again, another guy that entering the season, wide receiver 1 all the live long day, had a bunch of injury problems this year, and just could never get back on track as far as 2015 goes. He's now a free agent, so it's not a guarantee he'll be back in Chicago. But I think anywhere he goes, I think you have to look at him. He averaged, in only 9 games, he averaged 90 yards a game, which is a little higher than his career high. And look, the previous 2 seasons, which were not injury prone or not injury filled, he had 2,500 receiving yards and 17 touchdowns over 2 seasons. So,
yeah,
and again, obviously a big part of it is where he ends up. But look, I think a team is going to sign him that can plug him in right away and has a quarterback that will utilize him. Because, look, they're going to spend money on Alshon Jeffery. He's going to get paid. So wherever he goes, I like him to sort of bounce back and regain that sort of wide receiver 1 status.
And if you'll notice, pretty much all the players. I'm echoing. Okay, we're good.
Okay.
We're good. We're back, guys. So if you'll notice, all these players were injured, and that's a big part of buying low in Dynasty are the injury discounts. So especially major injuries now. As we've seen, technology and surgery has gotten better over the years. So one major injury isn't necessarily a death sentence anymore. So those are the types of players, just a general rule of thumb, to look for injury discounts on players with high talent. But yeah, no, I agree with Jeffrey. This free agency thing kind of hangs over players when it does come around. And he's probably, until he signs in free agency, it's going to be up in the air, and people won't avoid him, but they'll be less excited because of the lack of know. Like they don't know what's going on with him. So
right,
yeah. He's an interesting asset.
Believe me, I would love nothing more than for him to end up back in Chicago with Jay Cutler slinging it around. And look, I think Chicago needs him. I mean, they don't have they've got Kevin White sort of waiting in the wings, but again, I think they really want to see this Alshon Jeffery, Kevin White combo in action if they can help it. So, all right, Russ, you are up with your next buy low candidate.
All right. Well, this is one of my favorite players.
I was gonna say,
In
this is your boy, Russ. I know this is your boy.
his name is Jerick McKinnon. He's
Mhm.
the Minnesota Vikings backup running back currently. Um, he's shown in just 2 years from converting from a quarterback at Georgia Southern, which he was a quarterback, but they do a lot of running there. So it's kind of like he's figuring it out as he goes. But he's shown ability in all facets of the running back position, and I think the peak into what we've seen so far is exciting. Adrian Peterson's 31. And I just really like McKinnon's production. I like his draft position. I like his workout metrics. I just like him as a player. And I think eventually Peterson is going to at least slow down. And he's never really been a passing down back. So I think at the very least in 2016, we're going to see McKinnon get on the field more throughout the year. He had a nice stretch to end the season and at least be a sort of receiving down back. So he's going to get playing time next year, and I think he might be undervalued right now.
Yeah, and just to touch on running backs a little bit, I mean, you really had to dig down, especially in deeper leagues, deeper roster leagues. I mean, you're looking at like second and third string running backs on teams
Yeah.
that become viable options. I mean, look, the Chiefs were a classic case or a perfect example of that, where you had Jamal Charles go down about halfway through the season. Sharkandrick West showed up and was very productive for a handful of games. He goes down for a game or two, and then you've got Spencer Ware popping up, and he's a contributor down the stretch. I mean, it's insane how deep you have to go sometimes on these NFL depth charts. But these guys pay off. I mean, and even if it's stringing together a handful of weeks by running backs, like I said, guys like Spencer Ware can win you a critical game late in the season. So, with McKinnon, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, he's a perfect case of, he's the first man up if something happens to Peterson. So it's a perfect, believe me, it's a perfect handcuff if you've got Peterson, obviously. But even if you don't have Peterson, I think McKinnon is a great play there because, like you said, he's young. He's probably in line for at least passing down work. And look, who knows that they might be siphoning off carries from Peterson down the stretch this upcoming season. So, that's the kind of guy I think you target. And, as the theme that you and I have, he's still relatively cheap. He's not going to cost you an arm and a leg because people are just expecting this big breakout season, at least not yet. So, I think that's a perfect guy to target. I'm going to go back, Russ, to the quarterback position. I've liked this guy, and to me, a lot of the numbers are the same as they were, just maybe with a few blips here and there. I'm talking, of course, about Matt Ryan, Falcons quarterback. I look at just a lot of the numbers, whether it's the very basic numbers or even below the surface, were very similar to his previous seasons that he was considered a mid to low end quarterback one. I mean, he still threw for 4,500 yards this year. He still had a 7.5 yards a carry and threw for 287 yards a game. Now, he did dip in touchdowns. You can't argue with that. He only had 21, and then you couple that with 16 interceptions, which, again, the interceptions are not great, but those numbers, interception-wise anyway, are in line with his career numbers. The only drop-off was really touchdowns, which the previous couple seasons he had 28, 26, 32, 29, 28, right? So you had a very good run there of at least 26 touchdowns, if not more. So that's another guy. And like I said, it's not like I have any illusions that Matt Ryan's going to catapult to, top tier quarterback status. But look, could he sneak into low end quarterback one value? I really think he could this upcoming year.
That's an interesting guy I hadn't really thought about. He doesn't have anyone other than Julio right now,
and look, I was going to say that is actually a blessing and a curse heading into this offseason. I can't imagine them not addressing receiver.
That's what I was.
Yeah, whether it's in free agency or the draft.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, Roddy White was Roddy White for a long time there. And I think even for the better part of the last 3 years, he hasn't really been himself. I think they were kind of holding on to that coming into this year. And I think now it's pretty clear that they need someone else. They do have Justin Hardy there. I'm not sure how high his ceiling is. We'll see what they do this offseason. It sounds like there's talk of wide receivers, potentially even early. If they could get a deep threat across from him or a nice slot receiver, I think that could really boost both. Not really boost up Julio, but I don't think he'll need as many targets to be as effective. So I think that would boost Matt Ryan. Maybe they get a tight end in there as well. I mean, they're going to have to do something. So, like you said, I think it was so clear this year that they have to make a move in some direction.
You would hope so. And look, who knows? They could sign an Alshon Jeffery. They could draft a quarterback very high in the draft. Who knows? But I think, again, I'm not going to say this is like the bottom value or the least valuable Matt Ryan's going to be, but I think there's a lot of room for potential there, is what I will say.
Yeah.
So, all right, Russ, you are up.
All right. So if you haven't heard a Dynasty sort of podcast with us yet, I'm big on what I call the island of misfit toys, which is your late round picks. And they're basically a free, almost guys you'll find on your waiver wire. So when you're looking for cheap, you want to just have on the end of your roster to sort of hope and pray they become something. I'm looking at two guys, Robert Woods of the Buffalo Bills and Justin Hunter of the Tennessee Titans. Justin Hunter was basically a Dynasty League darling over the past few years, and he's been, I won't say a colossal bust, but a colossal bust. And Robert Woods has pretty much gone under the radar his entire career in Buffalo because he's been in Buffalo. So when you start to look at these players, they're going to be going in the 19th to 20th round of startups this year. And based on some of the research I've done, first through third round draft picks at that range have a better chance of breaking out than sort of any other player, like any old player, any guy who is an undrafted free agent or seventh rounder or anything like that. With that draft capital comes a better assurance of future opportunity. So I'm looking at those two as guys who maybe haven't shown a ton of upside yet, but might have a chance to do something, and they're basically free.
Yeah, and like you know, all good points, and like we alluded to, it's those kind of under the radar moves for something dirt cheap that can really make a difference. You know, and look, even if they don't turn into a wide receiver one, which the chances are very slim they do, at the very least, a couple of these guys can turn into very good contributors that are, you know, maybe wide receiver two some week, or at least a flex play during the season.
A good example of that this year was Tavon Austin, who was, I mean, nothing through 2 years. He was nothing. And
if you stuck with Tavon Austin, like, I applaud you. Like, I really,
yeah,
especially after those 2 years.
Let's hope you didn't. But if you did a startup that year and you sort of picked him in the 18th round or whatever, at least he's a rosterable player and sort of has some value now. So you're kind of looking for somebody like that.
Yeah. And you know, depending on how deep your leagues allow your rosters to be, it's a good idea to just stockpile those guys. You know, it doesn't cost you a lot. And look, in some cases, it's a lot more cost effective to give up maybe a late round rookie pick for one of these guys, you know, because at least you know, hey, they're going to have a spot on the team, as opposed to, you know, this lottery ticket that you're taking. So,
right.
All right, Russ, I will give one more because we, I think, have covered a lot of ground this evening. Sort of on the heels of the Calvin Johnson news, I'm going to go with Mr. Eric Ebron, or Ebron.
Ooh.
Sort of along the same lines as Tavon Austin. A lot of hype coming into the league. Drafted into the top 10, much like Tavon Austin was, but has not produced nearly as much as I think we all thought and hoped he would. Rookie year, really nondescript, 25 catches, 248 yards, and a touchdown. I don't really hold the rookie year against him because, as you and I have learned, rookie tight ends are just really, really difficult to be reliable, to produce that first year. But even in his second year, 47 catches, 537 yards, 5 touchdowns, an improvement. Don't get me wrong, but again, not worthy of that top 10 pick, at least not so far. But, I think he's a guy that the reputation now of him is as a disappointment. It's really dropped in the last 2 years. And that's a guy that still has the potential to be one of these tight end ones you and I talked about, a Zach Ertz, a Tyler Eifert. I'm not by any means guaranteeing that, but I think it's possible. If there's anyone that's in sort of that tight end 2 level that can make the jump to tight end 1, I think it's Ebron. And I think you can probably get him for pretty cheap.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely a guy you can target. I mean, who knows where his draft where he's going to go in dynasty drafts, but yeah, no, that's a prime target right there because he's going into year 3. You always have to give players at least 3 years, unless they're out of the NFL, and especially a guy who was picked so high. And Calvin Johnson retiring, this is going to be a huge sort of moment in Ebron's career. I think we're going to know pretty quickly headed into sort of the 2016 season if he's going to be a big contributor. And again, if he is early on, this could be a big 2016 for him.
I think so. And look, if you don't have one of those top tight end options on your dynasty team, Ertz, Eifert, Kelce, Reed, Olsen, Gronk, I mean, a lot of guys are fair game at that point. There's a lot of directions you can go in. And look, it doesn't hurt to have Ebron sort of waiting in the wings to see if he produces or not. So, All right, Russ. Well, that was a good first edition of the Fantasy Slant. As we said before, me and Russ will be back all off season to talk everything Dynasty, buy lows, sell highs, and everything in between. So until next time, this has been the Fantasy Slant.